This is The End in Mind, Season 2, Episode 8.
Welcome to The End in Mind. My name is Lori Lane, editor of theendinmind.net, and I'm here in the studio today. Well, actually, we're not in a studio. We are
Well, it's a
kind
pretty-
of snazzy studio, taking it easy up here at Breckenridge, Colorado, where we've had a great time and are going to continue to have a great time. But I'm here with Danielle Sterner, and we're going to be talking about our different styles of mothering and parenting. So I'm excited about that. Now, what do you mean by style?
Well, a few years ago, I think it's been a while now, maybe about 10 years.
Oh, you're getting old then.
Yeah, I am. Yes,
I'm
I
just
was
kidding.
mothering
I'm kidding.
longer than 10 years ago.
I'm just kidding.
I just kind of, I'm one of those people who loves personality profiles
Right.
and temperament tests and Strengths Finder and all that stuff.
Yes.
And so I kind of just came up with this sort of general idea of some categories of different styles of moms and the way women express themselves. And of course, there's always the group, and we know what temperament they are, and we know what their Strengths Finder is, that doesn't like to be labeled. But really, I think, understanding your strengths and weaknesses, your personality, your the things that make you distinct and unique, really can help to free us. And I think particularly in this area, I kind of had an epiphany where there was some tension in relationships with women in my life. And minor tension, but for the most part, I realized that we were very different.
Right.
And it really wasn't until I got to enjoy and was blessed by the benefits of someone else in my life that had the same style as that person I was having tension with, that I really understood them better.
I get you.
So
when you just mentioned it, when we're talking about styles, that has to do with what makes us unique, what makes us distinct from somebody else. So that means knowing what the differences are.
yes.
So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I think, I think something inside us wants to be very different. We want to be unique. We want to, not conform per se. And yet there are other things that we get very caught up in, and we don't want to be different.
Right.
And there's a lot of voices that go into that. But our differences have downsides and they have upsides. And I think one of the downsides of differences is that they cause conflict, because when we enter relationships or we enter a project or we set out to do something and accomplish something with an individual or a group of people, or just even in casual relationship or familial relationships, we approach things differently.
Yes.
Because of the way that we're made.
Yes.
And it causes conflict, and we don't realize that we're expecting someone else to do things the way that we do them, or we're imposing our priorities and our values and our perspective of the world on somebody else. And it's hard because conflict really needs to be seen as a welcome thing, I think.
Yes.
In relationships, when we can embrace the differences and
Right.
say, oh, I recognize the fact. And I did this to my husband when we were first married. I'm a very logical person. I'm high T, so I'm a thinker, and he's high F as a feeler. He has an amazing thinking mind, and he's very analytical. And of course, I have emotions. But as far as making our decisions, I tend to want the facts, and I want to think it through. And emotions kind of scare me a little
Right.
bit when it comes to making decisions. It doesn't feel secure. He had, when I met him, 21 years of instincts and strong feelings about things that he had come to trust for different reasons.
Right.
And he couldn't always articulate those reasons to me. And so I would get very frustrated. And it took me a while to go, oh, I need to really validate that as a unique approach to this. And it doesn't have to be the same as mine. And he shouldn't have to give me an answer for everything, or, a 3-point explanation. I could trust his instincts. He was just looking at it differently.
So you've mentioned now some challenges of the differences that we have, which
Mm-hmm.
are kind of like downsides,
Mm-hmm.
and then some of the great things that help us as couples or as teams working with other people that be
Are those very
upsides.
differences?
Yeah. So it's kind of a two sides of the same coin.
Absolutely. Yeah. So our differences cause conflict. They really can lead to the comparison game. And I think, especially as women, we, the illustration I use here is that my mom, growing up, I wanted to be a lot like my mom. She's very kind, very compassionate, very merciful toward people. She was very popular. She's very well liked. She never says
Yes.
the wrong thing to the wrong person. And I wanted to be just like her. The
Right.
problem is I'm not. I'm not anything like her, in that. Now, over time, I have hopefully gained some of her qualities and learned
Right.
things from her, implemented those traits. But but just my natural, my giftedness is very opposite that. And so I started comparing myself to my mom, even as a young girl. And then, of course, comparing ourselves, whether it's our mom or somebody that we admire or peers or the images that we see in media. The differences can cause us to compare ourselves. So they cause conflict, they cause comparison. The upside is that they create beauty. When we understand our differences from a spiritual perspective, and in First Corinthians, it says the body is made up of many members, but is one body, and that is Christ. That
Yes.
body is Christ. And Andy Stanley preached a sermon years ago on this that was really defining for me in the way that I saw this. He said that really literally what 1 Corinthians 12 means when it's talking about the body and all the different parts is that God literally took who Christ is and fragmented it into millions of tiny pieces and put each of those pieces into his children, the redeemed. And that when the redeemed come together with their differences in all their different parts, they create a picture of Christ to the world.
Absolutely.
And so they create beauty. That we reflect the differences that we have reflect Christ when we are comfortable with them, and when we then collaborate, which is the next upside, which is that it forces us to cooperate with one another.
Right.
We have to collaborate with one another, and it forces us into community. When sometimes we get overwhelmed with the emotional work of being in relationships, we need each other. We kind of have this sense that we are not enough, and that it takes all of us doing our different things and our different combining our different strengths and making up for each other's weaknesses. And so the downsides are conflict and comparison. The upsides and the redeeming factor is the way that we reflect Christ, and then the way that it forces us into community and it forces us to collaborate.
Gotcha. Well, differences are a great thing because that's why God created us to be unique individuals. But at the same time, sometimes what makes us different from others can also make us uncomfortable. So how can we wrap our arms around our differences and embrace those?
There's a high level leadership author who works mostly with corporate teams. His name is Marcus Buckingham, and he has a series of DVDs, training DVDs called Trombone Player Wanted. And it's a really fun illustration. It's a film, and the film is broken up into like little episodic, and then he talks about the principles in between these little pieces of the film. But the whole narrative of the film is this little boy who is learning to play the trombone, and he has this trombone, but everywhere he goes, he's drumming with his pencils, he's drumming in his bed, he's fascinated by percussion, and he goes through, and finally in the end he puts a sign on the door that says Trombone Player Wanted, and he gives up the trombone and he switches to percussion, even though for so long he kept trying to stick with but he just wasn't good at the trombone, and what was inside him was percussion.
Right.
So, and so he talks about playing to your strengths, and he's talking about it from a corporate team standpoint, but I think there's a lot for us to learn as mothers. And the main defining concept of that material is that statistically we don't really grow a whole lot in our areas of weakness, but we exponentially grow in our areas of strength. So to put our energy into our strengths and accept the weaknesses, let someone else do where they're strong, what we're weak in. And I think that's really important as moms for ourselves, because as mothers, we tend to want to be every woman. We feel like we need to be all.
Right.
And we don't. And so these sort of categories or styles of mothers that I came up with kind of helps people go, oh yeah, that she is different in this way, and I'm not that type of mom. And for me, it gave me a lot of freedom to embrace the other women in my life and celebrate their strengths, and embrace my own and not worry so much about the
Okay, so now
weaknesses.
you've got me curious. So, like, how am I supposed, now that I'm a year and a half away from being done with active mothering,
right.
how am I supposed to find my mothering style? How do you find that?
Well, I think, let me just share what they are.
Okay,
I'll
great.
share the categories and some of the upsides and downsides of each style. So there's just 5 of them. And at the conference this week, at the End in Mind conference, I spoke on this, and I asked for suggestions. I think we may have identified one additional style, but I want to go home and work on that.
Gotcha.
But it was good. I had good feedback from the women there. And so the first one is the teaching mom. And I tend to think that this probably is your style, especially now that I've been in your home and known you for a few years. We all sort of have kind of a primary and a
Secondary?
and yeah. I mean,
Okay,
that's the
alright.
idea. Although it was interesting, the feedback from the women, they related to different things in different areas.
Right.
But the teaching mom, she decorates her house with maps and timelines, and her refrigerator is usually covered with her children's artwork and their school projects and things
Right.
like that. She's usually very patient. She's good at getting down on the kids' level and talking with them, and but she does it. She can leave chores undone. There can be dishes in the sink, and her bed can be unmade, and she can be totally focused in teaching and helping the kids with homework. And these are the moms that in the doctor's office, they think to have their kids bring their homework or a book. When my kids are just talking to me the whole time,
Right.
and then I look around and they're multitasking and they've thought ahead. That's a teaching mom. But the downside of that is that they can prioritize knowledge over other things. They can start to think that everyone should be getting all the same boxes checked off as they are, because they're very much about checking off boxes and accomplishing amassing a body of knowledge. And sometimes they can miss the mentoring moments in making application because they're so concerned with the actual facts or knowledge that they forget to apply it
Gotcha.
in different moments. So that's the teaching mom. The creative mom, free-spirited, we know creatives in our society make beauty out of everything around them. These moms can take a stack of books and a bowl and some fruit and something else and make it look like a still life. And for some reason, it looks like a work of art.
Right.
And then I go home from these people's houses, or these moms' houses, and I grab a stack of books and a bowl and fruit, and I can't make it look at anything like that.
It looks like a stack of books.
Yeah, and a bowl and a fruit, right?
Yeah. Gotcha.
So, but they encourage imagination. They encourage people to stop and smell the roses, and when there is something of beauty, they notice it and they clue the rest of us into it. And they create warm environments for us to be in, and that brings out certain things. The downsides of a creative mom is that she can struggle with high expectations in relationships. They have this picture. It's what enables them to create that picture, artistically. But then when life doesn't match up to that picture, they can be disappointed or angry.
Yeah.
And so sometimes they lack order. They can be so open-minded that standards can be a little muddy. So they want to embrace the creative side and embrace the free side, which is good. But then sometimes they miss the delivering the principles and the absolute truths
Right.
with their kids. Okay, so the sentimental mom, they're the documentarians of our society. Like they love to create memories. They're usually very good at holidays and traditions
Okay.
and maintaining rituals because they're thinking about creating memories and then capturing that memory. I often hear creative moms say, yes, because when my kids are grown, I want them to remember all the good times so that they can look back and say, I had a good childhood.
Right.
Which
Gotcha.
is funny. Whereas I, not being a sentimental, I don't have a single picture of my kids on my walls anywhere, and I'm too busy in the moment to be thinking about capturing it. But I'm
Gotcha.
sure glad I have a daughter and a sister who are sentimentals
Right.
because they capture everything, and
That makes sense.
I'm grateful for that. They're typically great. I said with holidays and traditions, they frame life and give us a different perspective. So it enables the rest of us to see things. So when a couple years ago we had Easter and we created this beautiful dinner as a family and we sat down as a family, and my daughter is a photographer and she captured it beautifully, and I go back to those pictures so much. It warms my soul to remember and to see from a different perspective.
Right.
Oftentimes when pictures are taken of my home where I see all the things that haven't been done, somebody will take a picture and be like, oh, I have a pretty house. That's a pretty picture.
Right,
And
exactly.
it just helps us to see life differently. The thing about sentimentals is that they're so busy capturing the moment, sometimes they miss it. Right?
Yes,
they're
for sure,
just
right.
they're behind the camera all the time. These are the ones that are kind of miserable to go to Disney World with because
you
they're
have to stop and take a picture.
of
every 5
everything,
seconds.
and everybody's
Yeah.
like, we just want to ride the ride, not take pictures before and afterward. So and they as well have, because they tend to be focused on the framing it up. they can tend to miss, they have the high expectations, and then they tend to miss what is happening, because if it didn't measure up to their expectations, they're disappointed.
Exactly.
So, and then we have two others. The nurturing mom prioritizes physical needs. And this is one of those aha moments, because my mother-in-law is a nurturer.
Nurturing mom.
And she cared a lot about that. And when I first, because my mom isn't that way and I wasn't that way, when I first met her, I didn't understand her completely, and it could cause tension. Then I had a dear friend of mine who's a nurturer, and she cared for me, and in a way that was, and nurtured my kids and nurtured me, and made me wonderful food when I was sick and pregnant, and brought over this amazing soup that got me
Right.
through my pregnancies. And I realized that they were the same characteristics in this friend that I appreciated so much that my mother-in-law had. And
Gotcha.
it made me just embrace and love her and appreciate her uniqueness all the more. So they prioritize the physical needs. They make wonderful food. They're usually very compassionate, and they're really good listeners typically. The downside is they can be merciful to a fault and not draw boundaries. They can be manipulated by their kids, these moms, easily. Sometimes they can't get out of the kitchen. My friend that's that way, I love what she does in the ministry of that. But I had to come to a point where one day where I just said, you need to use paper plates. She was homeschooling 5 kids, and while she was busy making them food, there was things that needed to be addressed. And I
Right.
just said, look, you don't have to use plates and wash dishes and make
Not every meal has to be gourmet or
right.
on
So I
China.
said, just use paper plate. So sometimes they tend to just get caught up in the routine of meeting the physical needs, that they forget the discipleship aspect of mothering. And so that's the nurturing mom. So the last one is the experiential mom, and this is sort of my primary style. They're usually highly relational, incredibly ambitious. They prioritize coaching for their kids typically, not just them coaching, even though that typically is their style of mothering and mentoring, but they like other coaches to be, but they also want to be in relationship with and in the activities that their kids are doing. They want to experience life with their kids.
Right.
That typically means they stay pretty close to their kids and they're pretty in tune with them emotionally and spiritually. And they tend to be equippers and motivators. So they're usually looking for how do I build this skill? How do I create experiences that move this person to the next level of
Gotcha.
growth?
Okay.
The downsides is that they can be drivers, so they can stress their families out because they don't want to miss opportunities, and they want to go from one experience to another. They tend to be delegators instead of servants, so it's real easy for me to I'm accomplishing things and moving on to the next experience, and I can get lost because I
Gotcha.
forget that they need to see me just serving as well.
Gotcha.
And obviously they tend to possibly be busy or overcommitted at times, or maybe all the time. And interestingly, the service-oriented thing, that's the one that the other moms suggested, because there were some moms who didn't necessarily resonate strongly with one of these, but they did resonate strongly with the idea that some moms are very driven by service. And so I want to go home and think about that and profile it.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Fascinating. I mean, so in 1 minute or less, how am I supposed to become free to be the mothering, to develop the mothering style that I have?
I can do that in less than 1 minute.
Great.
I think the most important thing for moms to realize is that God is sovereign and gave you with your style, created you uniquely, and they gave your kids to you, which means that your style is what they needed. And if we could really embrace that and say, no, me being me is more important, and I think it creates incredible security in our kids because it frees them to embrace themselves. Nobody goes to bed at night thinking, oh, I really want my kids to grow up enslaved to the comparison game and conflict.
Right.
We go to bed thinking, I want my child to be free.
Right.
And I'm saying this is a very practical way to be free and to model freedom for your children. It's just to get very comfortable with what you're good at and what you're not. Bring other people into your life to make up for your weaknesses and create a team environment, or even with your kids. Share the load and realize that God ordained you and your style for your kids and their styles.
That's incredible. That's great. So glad you shared that with us today.
Glad to.
And I'm sure if our listeners want more information on this, they can listen to the workshop that was done that we're going to be uploading to the website. It'll be in the show notes that Danielle did at the Reset End in Mind conference. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.